In 2019, Codemasters released the fourth title in the Grid series called Just Grid. Until then, the Grid series was going downhill. So, Codemasters released Grid in an attempt to revive the series. One major change was to strip away the in-depth team management game mode that previous entries had worked so hard to cultivate. As a result, the game fell flat for many fans of the series. Racers could no longer build their own racing teams. Additionally, it gave more leeway for racers on tracks, like, for example, not having to follow a strict racing line to win the race. That said, some gamers welcomed the streamlining changes with open arms. Without placing too much focus on strict guidelines and an in-depth team management system, some gamers felt Grid created more room for fun, fast-paced racing. Furthermore, there were a couple of new additions to the Grid series. For instance, players could take on their nemesis, adding a nice touch to adrenaline-infused races. There were many more epic locations and racing personalities. You could argue, though, that much of the appeal still relied heavily on the original. For a reboot of sorts, it felt like a wasted opportunity to thrust the Grid series to new heights. Grid Legends is the latest entry and the fifth installment in the Grid series so far. With the release date being so recent, fans had high expectations for a groundbreaking release. Unfortunately, Grid Legends didn't quite hit the mark and felt a lot like what Grid 2019 should have been. On the plus side, Grid Legends is a much larger in-scale entry than any of the previous games. There are many more expansive tracks with an upscaled variety. Grid Legends offers more replayability, thanks to a whopping number of races and multiplayer options. Unfortunately, Grid Legends falters for the same reasons Grid 2019 did. There simply isn't enough to satisfy fans' expectations. There is still a heavy reliance on the originals. Customization options are squeezed dry. Car rosters desperately need refreshing. And the team-building aspect fans enjoyed from the originals is still a no-show. For all the bad, though, there's enough good to create thrilling racing sequences, at least in the name of reliving history's best moments. Grid 2 took what the first entry in the Grid series did, and made it an example of what a sequel should do. It's one of the best racing games out there, even when put side by side with other racing franchises. Besides in-depth team management, Grid 2 had elimination and overtaking events. Elimination events created such a thrilling sense of rivalry that they hit the ground running at the time. Overtaking then sealed it off with a bow with its time-sensitive challenges without crashing. Grid 2 employed quite similar techniques to its predecessor, which is great because the predecessor rocked, and the sequel rocked too because of it. Grid Autosport is the third entry in the Grid series, and the first to attempt to color outside the lines. Because team building received such positive reviews, Grid Autosport took a step further to include giving your teammates tips on driving mid-race. You even had a scale of 1 to 5 that ranked from how defensive the driver is, to how fast they wipe out the competition. Straight off the bat, Grid Autosport made it clear it was designed to appeal to longtime fans. It kept everything that had been working for years while refining the graphics and handling to fit the changing times. Gamers could switch between camera angles, all offering realistic, gorgeous views. The AI drivers behaved more like real-life models. The cars would spin, crash, get lopsided, and more. Immense variety allowed for hours of replayability. And split-screen multiplayer allowed tagging along friends and family for the ride. This was Grid at its finest. For many long-running franchises, the first game is often the most unforgettable one. Race Driver Grid is no different. It hit the stands with a bang, exemplifying the epitome of lightning-fast, intense racing like a pro. Visually, Race Driver Grid rocked at the time. The cars looked classy. Physics worked well on an impressive car roster. Any gamer could jump into a random session and still have a good time. At a time when there wasn't much competition, Race Driver Grid held the Best Racer title for quite a long time. Of course, the freedom to build your own racing team helped set high standards for future racing simulations. It's now a phenomenal way to play career mode, albeit with more in-depth features. Race Driver Grid was the first to capture the idea of taking part in one-off races, slowly building up your car collection, customizing them with the logos and brands you like, signing teammates to race with you in your ever-growing team, and earning even more currency to splurge on more cars and aesthetics. For that reason alone, Race Driver Grid remains one of the best racers ever made.